Hello and welcome to the BC Training Place, the channel for all things BC, where you get to not only learn how one of the best ERP solutions on the market works in detail, but you also get to see why you'd want to use any specific feature and how it applies to the real world. In this specific video, we will be looking at how to administer new and existing environments in the software as a service version in the Microsoft Cloud. As my main source, and you'll see a link of it in the description of the video, I'm using this article and, well, a few others as well, but I specifically like this one and I can highly recommend it. I'm not affiliated in any way with Innovia. In fact, I work for another company, Intelligent Systems, but I really appreciate the effort Mr. Gino Pak, I hope I pronounced the name correctly, put into writing the article. It's a really short and concise way, and nice way of explaining the details of how tenants and production and sandbox environments work and how to set up the users correctly. So I do encourage you to check this one. He more or less describes what I'm talking about with a few exceptions. I do add some more details that are not listed here, but this is a very good starter. So when we're talking about the software as a service version of Business Central, first of all, as the name implies, it lives in the Microsoft Cloud in Azure. And as such, the first requirement to have a BC environment is to have a tenant there. So if your organization already is using Office 365 or any other Azure-based services, you probably have a default tenant created, and also for many organizations, this is probably your default domain. This is probably the default way you create and administer users. But even if you don't, buying your first Business Central licenses will essentially create this for you. So the tenant is, or as I've already used the term, think of it as your domain or Active Directory. It's can be a bit more complicated, but that's probably the easiest way to think about it. So administering this one happens through something called the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, and we'll take a look at it in a few seconds. And then as kind of part of that tenant or linked to it, however you want to imagine it, you have the Business Central Administration Center up there, which we'll be looking at later. And this is where you create your production and sandbox environments, which you can also think of as your databases. So let's start with the tenant of a few settings. Again, this is a training more for users and beginner administrators, so I won't go through all the details, but long story short, this is where for each of your existing users, you will need to assign a license. So let's say this lady, Alicia Tomber, if you want to provide her access to Business Central, then you'll have to open the user, then click on the licenses and apps and assign, and she already has one assigned, a license for Business Central. Now, what I'm running here is CDX-based trial environment. And there'll be a whole separate video detailing what this is. And this is why you see this type of license. In a normal productive environment, you will be seeing something like Business Central Essentials or Business Central Premium User or Business Central Team Member, or it could be a device user as well. So you will have to carefully choose which type of license you want to assign. And of course, the different types of licenses will give you a different level of access to the system. Now, again, as part of a whole separate video, we will discuss some new developments from the last, well, maybe not that new, maybe a little bit more than half a year now, or at least 3 months, I think, where Microsoft has finally allowed a mixed combination of premium and essential licenses. So if that's a scenario we're interested in, you can click the notify bell so you'll be notified when this video comes out. But long story short, you're not able to have within the same tenant different environments, which can be, some environments have premium users and some environments have essential users. So if you have two legal entities, let's say a production plant and a trade company, then they can be using different tier of licenses. You're not forced to buy premium licenses for just trade operations. But that's a whole other story, and there are some specific setups that are necessary. So to simply provide access to Business Center, you need to assign a license to your user. Now, however, in order to provide that user with access to the admin center and allow them to either create new environments or maintain existing ones, you also need to provide an admin level access. And there are 3 ways to do that. So the first way is actually not available to users which are in your tenant, and that will be for the users of your partner. And this is something Microsoft introduced some time back. It's called the delegated admin access. And essentially it means that there is a link that your partner will send you, which you click, and then you as an admin, of course, so not everyone can do it, but a global admin from your side can click the link and basically accept the admin relationship with that partner. And that admin relationship can be for several different tiers of access, but all of these tiers will be some level of administrator in your environment, but they will not be users in your tenant. So basically what you're saying is you're allowing the users in the tenant of your partner to have access to your tenant, not necessarily to this menu I'm here. Maybe they can only have access to the admin center, and then perform operations for you. And this is intended for smaller customers who don't have their own dedicated administrator IT personnel. So then the partner can be creating new users and assigning licenses to them and so on and so forth. For slightly bigger organizations where you probably have your own IT department, then the admin privileges that the partner, i.e. myself and my colleagues, get can be much more limited. So maybe we can only administer the Business Center, admin center, but we don't do anything with your users or licenses. And maybe we can submit help desk tickets on your behalf as well. So there's 4 of these. I'll try, if I don't forget, to put a link in the description also to an article from Microsoft describing the delegated admin links. Now, why this is important for customers is because that means that those users from the partner's tenant do not need a license to be assigned. In other words, you can have any number of users who can come into your database in Business Center and perform operations for you without you having to pay for a license for them. And of course, this is intended for support roles. You know, sometimes me as a consultant may have to log into a customer's database, try to reproduce something or perform a setup or whatever. In the past, it was mandatory for the customer to essentially have an extra license or more than one. So me and my colleagues could be logging into that database. And this is still the case for on-prem implementations. In the cloud, you get to do this for free, which is, I think, amazing. So that is option number 1, and this is only for the external partner users. Option number 2 is, and 2 and 3 are linked to each other, is assigning a role to this user under roles. So you see this user, Alicia Tomber, is already a global administrator. So that's the highest possible permission you can give them. Think of them as a super user. She can come over here, she can create other users, change their permissions, anything you can possibly think of, she has the right to do that. And obviously you will want to have as few of these as possible. So the last option is you can go a level below that, and you can assign something called a Dynamics 365 administrator. And how you do this, you click to the manage admin roles. Having a normal user means they have no administrative access. Administrative access, it's either a global or one of the other, and it's not global user, it's global administrator. That's what she used to be. And to get the Dynamics 365, you need to click show all by category, and then you can find it here, Dynamics 365 administrator. So for users in your organization to whom you want to allow the capability to administer Business Center, but you don't want to let them do anything else, like creating new users, assigning licenses, and so on, then you give them this right and exclude this one. And then you just click save changes and so on. So that's pretty much administering in the tenant. There's a lot more things that can be done here, but nothing that's interesting to us right now. Then the next step would be, and by the way, in a lot of cases, the first step, assigning the first administrator and creating the first environment, which is what we're going to do next, would be done by your partner. So the next step is going to the Business Center or Admin Center. And there's two ways to get there. One is if you have directly this URL, which is businesscentral.dynamics.com, and then you have your tenant essentially, and then admin. So in my case, I just bookmarked this one. But if you already have an existing Business Central environment created, then from within it, if your user has the relevant administrator role, they will see Admin Center as an option here, which opens the same menu. So what can you do here? Well, here you can do almost anything it has to do on an environment level. And an environment, as I mentioned previously, think of it as your database, essentially. So what you see here under the environments menu is a list of the existing ones. And you can see that you have the type, and it's either a production or a sandbox. So for any given license that's purchased, you will get 1 production and 3 sandboxes. Up to 3 sandboxes. You don't necessarily need all of them. And that's the default you get, no matter if you have just 1 or 100 or 200 licenses for Business Central. There are scenarios, and I kind of mentioned this, there will be a separate video, but there are scenarios where you may need to have more than 1 production. So let's say manufacturing and trade entities, which you want to split either for licensing purposes or something else. Or alternatively, and that's possibly the more common scenario, you just have legal entities in different countries. So one of the things you choose when creating an environment is your country and region. And this also defines the default localization package that is installed. Specifically for countries like Great Britain, USA, France, Spain, so on, like the big countries where Microsoft provides the localization themselves. Then choosing the region will by default create the environment with that localization pre-installed. So what happens if you have a legal entity in Great Britain and another one in Germany or France? You possibly want to have different localizations, or let's say Great Britain and US, well, possibly a better example. So then this could force you to have 2 production environments, and you can. It's just an extra cost. I don't have the amount off the top of my head. It's not too expensive, and you can have theoretically an unlimited number of additional production environments. You just pay extra for each of them, but you pay for the right to have an extra production environment. You don't have to pay by additional users. So any licenses you purchased could potentially access both environments. And the nice additional bonus is that with every production environment you purchase, you get free additional 3 sandboxes. So for 2 production environments, you get 6 sandboxes. For 4, you get up to 12 sandboxes, and so on and so forth. So it's a nice bonus. Having said that, there is a capacity cap. Oh, I get signed off way too easy from here. So there is a capacity cap for the database. You get 80 gigabytes base storage, and there's, I think it's plus 2 gigabytes per user, for at least for premium and essentials users. Don't quote me on that. We can check in the manual separately. And you can also buy specifically additional capacity. So buying a second production environment does give you a slight bump to the or base tenant, but I don't think it doubles it. So you might get to something like, I don't know, 100, like 20 or 30 gigabytes extra, something like that. So it doesn't necessarily double it. If I remember correctly, and this could easily change because Microsoft are quite flexible on these things, and they change quite often. But the idea is you still have a total shared storage for your tenant here. So yeah, you still have to be careful with storage. Now, something else that I was reminded while preparing for this video is when you create the first environment, if it's a sandbox, then eventually Microsoft will always automatically create a production environment for you. And I haven't found anywhere in the documentation that it does it. I don't know exactly why they do it, But if I was to delete this production environment that I've called Replit Demo, then within the next 1 or 2 days, a default production environment with the name production will be created automatically. And if I delete it, it will recreate it again. And I have no idea why they do it. It's just Microsoft assumes there has to be a production environment. It will not create sandboxes for me automatically, but productions they do. And it's not a big issue because presumably you will always have at least one production environment, but it's some strange automation that I don't know how to turn off. Not that I have spent extra time searching for that. So, but just so you know, if you're surprised if a new production environment appears, it's just done by Microsoft behind the scenes. I don't know why. So you have one production up to 3 sandboxes, and for each of them you have to choose the country or region. So how do you actually create an environment? Well, that's kind of obvious. You click the new button. It takes usually a few seconds to load a wizard here in the right hand side. And the first thing you will do is you will specify a name for that environment. So there is a limitation. The name has to be one continuous string of text and characters. So if I want to call it new sandbox, it will tell me that I need to connect those two. So I can put a dash or an underscore. I don't think it will allow me these special characters. So it's either dash or underscore, but it has to be one string of text. Then by the default, the type is production. So you see it tells me that I cannot create more than the one I already have. So I can create one more sandbox. As you can see, I have only 2. And the last thing you choose is what is the country. Now, here is where those of you who have only worked with on-prem might be tempted to look, okay, where's the W1? There is no W1. You only choose a specific region. And then depending on the region, you also get some kind of a localization. So for my native country, BG, for example, or Albania or Romania, or any of a host of other countries where Microsoft does not have a standard localization that they provide. The localization is something you buy as an extension from a local partner. Then selecting such a region essentially means you get a W1 database. Which, by the way, if you're looking for a partner to build your own localization, that's a nice cheat code to get a W1 database with no fancy stuff where you can plug in your localization without having impact. So basically you get a W1. So yeah, something else is when selecting the region, especially if you're playing around, obviously it has to be the one in which your customer is. But especially if you're doing this for training or testing purposes, just be aware that for some of the regions, not for all of them, choosing the region will also change the language and the translation of the master data and the sample data you get from the default demo companies from Microsoft. So for example, if I choose a German region, then all my demo data will be in German. I don't remember the terms, but yeah, for example, it will not be a chart of accounts, it will be a content plan. And then the name of the accounts themselves will be in German. So unless you speak German, beware. BG, for example, just gives me the default Kronos with default English names, so that's fine. So just be aware of these slight differences. So give a name, select the type, select the region, and most of the times you only have one version, so you can't really choose. However, periodically, when you're creating a new version, you may see a preview option here, so you can create with the next version in preview mode. And I don't think I've ever actually seen, but there could be a short period of time where you might see like 21.0, which is the currently deployed version, and 21.1 is in progress of being deployed. So yeah, you might see both of them for some short period of time. But in my experience, most of the time you see what you see here now. It's just 21.1, latest one. New environment will be in the latest one by default. So you choose these things, you click create, and then it will usually give you the new sandbox, the new environment here, and the state will be preparing. And usually it takes between a few and up to 5 to 10 minutes, no more than that. And you can just hit refresh a few times until it eventually finishes provisioning it. So this is basically creating a new database, creating the service tier, and all of that stuff. So while this is happening, let's look at what you can do with existing environments. So for example, if I can click on the name of the test 21, and this will take me to the environment administration section for this specific environment. So the first things you can do is you can, for example, define the link to the application insights. Again, a separate video for that. There is a help here you can follow. I highly recommend that you activate it for any production environment. Really useful information there, but we won't discuss it now. You can define a security group, and again, this will be part of that video for having mixed licenses in one tenant. But in short version is you can define, if you have created security groups, which I don't have here, and you do this in the tenant, you can limit that a certain environment is only accessible for users part of a certain security group. And this could be a cool way to limit who has access to which environment. And of course, this is the URL of the environment itself, which you might notice is the same as the admin center. You just replace the admin with the name of the environment itself. So it's quite easy. And I did not want to do that. So then in the version management, you have a few options. Of course, you have the current version. You can see if there is an update and if there is a new version being available, like the case is now. And then if there is a new version, but only when the new version is available, you can see the currently automatically assigned by Microsoft scheduled update date, which you can then modify. So as soon as a new update becomes available, and it's Microsoft will schedule a date for you, which is usually something like 2 dates in the 2 weeks in the future, and then you can change it. And there is a checkbox here which allows you to allow to run the update outside the update window, which is this time frame here. So you normally schedule a standard time update window, which the one you see here between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. next day, that's the default one that is set up whenever you create a new environment. So for example, I have chosen here to do it on a weekend. Or rather Microsoft has chosen, which allows me, and actually I did this manually to be honest, allows me to say, well, since it's a weekend, nobody's working, then you can go beyond, like start earlier or finish later than 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. But normally, whenever the automatic scheduling happens, this is off, which means Microsoft will be respecting this time frame that you set up. Speaking of which, this is a default setting that you can modify at any point after you created the environment, and it's not linked to whether an update is available. And this is just you saying, hey, don't bother me before that hour, and you better not be stopping my environment after that hour. So basically, what's the range when users are active in the database. And then Microsoft will do their best to respect. Something they added relatively recently is you can link that to a time zone. Before I somehow assumed it's my time zone, but actually didn't know, so I just gave it a larger range. So now you know that this is exactly 8 p.m. in my specific time zone. What else you can do with the environment? Well, you can potentially rename it if you need to. You can also delete an environment. There is an extra security step. Even if I click yes, it's gonna ask me to manually type the name of the environment just to make sure that I am not just messing around. So it's just an extra layer of security. And something they added several versions ago is you can restore an environment. It's a really cool feature because it's essentially, right now it's still creating the other one. So one thing that's cool is, and I'll show you in a few minutes when this finishes creating, is you can think of it as if Microsoft makes a backup every minute, and you can restore in 1 minute intervals if you need to. And there are some limitations that I'll show in a few seconds. Something else you can do here is you can create a ticket. Possibly a future video. I don't know if it's really necessary. But basically clicking here will take you to a Power Portal where, and you need to have the right permissions for that. You need to be a support admin. So it's, I actually have to give a thumbs up to Microsoft support most of the time. They will respect and react very quickly if you are, and you can see I've created a bunch of tickets here. They will react very quickly, respecting the urgency. So I've had cases where it's an urgent request, but just one, to be honest. I don't usually have urgent problems that require Microsoft support. But on one case, I wanted their help really fast, and I kind of pushed them. So I said it's really urgent. It was more like I reply in the next few hours will be fine. They replied within half an hour. It was really fast. We discussed the issue, and then we both agreed to decrease the urgency, and then we actually resolved it relatively quickly. And they also respect the region where you want the support to happen. So if I say I'm in Bulgaria, they will typically find a support person from a support center in Bulgaria that can speak Bulgarian if I want to, or in Germany, German, and so on. So I don't know if they have one in every single country around the world. I doubt it, but as a general rule, you can get a more or less local person to help you. And I've been quite pleasantly surprised by the level of knowledge they have. Like, I usually don't expect a Microsoft support person to have really in-depth knowledge of how BC works on a technical level. And they do. I mean, they don't necessarily need to escalate to second or third level support every time. So it's quite nice. So big thumbs up. So you can raise a ticket. You can also... I've never had a reason to create a database export, and my experience was that you used to have to raise a ticket for that, so I haven't actually used that feature. But I do know that if you want to, for some reason, either create a local backup periodically, or if you also want to downgrade from cloud-based to on-prem for some reason, then you can actually just get a full SQL backup that you can then restore locally and continue. So I imagine it's linked to that, but I haven't had a reason to play with this function. What I really do like is the Sessions tab. Yep, as usual, I get signed off. So the Sessions tab actually allows me to see the users who are connected to this specific environment. There should be no one right now. And actually, let me see, there should be with this one. And some of you who used to work with NAV might be familiar. There was an option to actually kick out a user. So we have this nice cancel session option. You can click that. And essentially what it means is that for this guy over there, I get a message that they're, in this case, paused. But yeah, essentially I killed their session. So really cool function. Also, obviously be careful. This is where you can also restart the whole environment. So think of it as restarting the service for the users in on-prem implementations. Could be dangerous, but also in some cases could be really important. Okay, so the sandbox is created, so I can show you the restore option. So for completely new sandbox on obviously sandbox environment or production, there is nothing to restore. Because there is simply no archives yet. So I expect to get the error or just message telling me there's nothing that can be done. Yeah. However, for an older database or environment, when you click restore, it will tell you the dates from which you can restore. So I can start from today going all the way back to 25th of October. So that's kind of a month. And I think this is a relatively fresh database. So actually, you know what? Let me check. I think this one is older. So I should possibly get until the 17th of October. Okay, no, 20th. So maybe it's not as old as that, but still about a month usually. So let's say I want to start from today, and then you get to choose the time frame. So right now it's 13:35 on my computer. You can't actually see that because of my face. Let's move this. So 13:35. So if I choose 13:35, you will see I get the error message saying that I can start at 1:20, which is exactly 15 minutes ago. So you cannot do less than 15 minutes before the right now point. But then starting from that 15 minutes ago, I can start with 1:20, 19, 18. So any minute. So think of it as if every minute there is a backup being created. And then I can create it as another sandbox, which I don't have any more free ones, and give it a name. And the intention behind that is Let's say you're doing, I don't know, monthly closing or opening balances loading or some major operation that you messed up in such a way that it will take hours to fix, and it's easier to just redo the original posting correctly. So what you can do is you can just hop back a few minutes before you made the mistake, which of course assumes there is no one else working in the database. You're not asking, I don't know, 100 other people to redo whatever they're all doing. But you can actually restore this as a sandbox and then continue from where you left off. Why you would create a sandbox first and possibly then restore that as your production environment is because, well, maybe you don't remember if you hit post at 117 or 118. So you can restore this one, check if it's the correct backup. If yes, then delete production and overwrite it. Or if not, go 1 minute back and then. So that's the intention behind it. You do have a limit of 10 restores per month for each of the environments, which I think is extremely generous because, let's be honest, how often would you be doing mistakes like that? And if you are doing mistakes like that way more often, then please get trained. So I have actually not had a reason to do that even once. It's not because I'm so cool. It's just, processes, procedures, and so on. But like I've tried it in test and it works. And it's possibly my favorite safety net feature that they provided. And the last thing you can do with the environment from this screen is you can open the apps. Again, after you re-log in, after being kicked out. So this would allow you to essentially see all the apps, think extensions, installed on this specific environment. And then from here, you can see if there is an update, and then a button will appear here. You can click update and activate. And normally this opens quite a bit faster. So why this could be important is think of an administrator role where you don't want the administrator to have access to the actual data, like financial information inside the database, but you want them to check if there is an update, or you may need to give them access to update an extension. So it's a privacy policy thing. So essentially the extensions within Business Central can be updated from here without the necessity of going in Business Central, looking for extension management, and then finding if there's an update and so on. So again, a really cool security feature. So that's pretty much how environments work. So you can create them, you can copy them. Oh, by the way, I did forget to mention that when you're copying, you can copy a production environment into a sandbox into a production, sandbox to another sandbox, a production to another production. So you can go any way you want, which did not used to be the case always. So cool that they finally did it. Now, I should have possibly mentioned that whenever there's a new update, you will typically get an email telling you that there's an update available and it has been scheduled for whatever date and time. In order to get that email, however, you need to set up the notification recipients. You can add as many of those as you want. It's just another user, something like that, and it's, I guess, has to be a valid email, at least looking like a valid email, and then this guy will start receiving emails. So you can add more than one person here. Now, Microsoft mentioned recently that this feature is going to be changed, and from the way I understood it, it's going to be removed, and then they're going to somehow move these notifications to the application insights or Azure notification messaging. I'm not sure, so I need to see an actual documentation to try it. So until that happens, you definitely have to, and I highly encourage to set up the notification recipients, because in addition to notifying you for new versions, Microsoft will also check and validate automatically your database against future versions. So right now the active version is 21.0 and in process of being rolled out is 21.1. So in this situation, I could get an email for as far ahead as 21.3. Yeah, maybe even 4, but at least 2 versions ahead of the one that's being currently rolled out. and the email will say something like, you have an extension in this environment, and they'll tell you which extension, and they will even give you a bunch of the error messages that are being caused by trying to implement that future version. So they give you a good at least 2 to 3 months, sometimes even more, to fix whatever problems you have in the extension before that update becomes available. Which is the reason why I actually haven't had a case where an update just doesn't work, because there's plenty of time to fix it. Now, of course, developers actually get warnings for up to 9 months ahead of time, and maybe even more than that, about features being changed in the developer end. But sometimes maybe they don't pay attention. So this is like a final last preventative measure from Microsoft to warn you, and I actually encourage my customers to also get that email so they can also check. Now, what you should know is, if for some reason your partner doesn't react on time, then when the update comes over, Microsoft will try to update, it will fail, and it will automatically reschedule the update for usually up to a week further ahead in time. And then it will try again. And I think in my experience, usually they try 2 up to 3 times. And if by the 3rd time the extension has not been fixed, then they will just unplug this extension, so to speak, and just update whatever can be updated. And then it's up to you to figure out what to do with the not working extension. So your database will get updated. The only question is, will you also get all the functionality that you want to have there? So there is also Microsoft are being kind of generous there, because usually when a small update like 21.1 coming up, you have about 4-week window to do the update. So if you schedule the update to happen at the last week, and then it fails, then you can get up to, I think, almost 2 weeks extension on the 4 weeks until they decouple your non-working extension. Now, add to that the minimum of 3 months ahead of time, they warn you that this extension is gonna fail, and I think that's more than generous. So again, I've never had a customer where this was an actual problem, but they're doing their best to help customers and partners. Now I'll skip this happens way too often. So I'll skip the authorized apps. I'll just mention that this is a relatively new feature where you can authorize certain apps to perform modifications to the environment. So this has to do with some automations. So we'll skip that for now. It's probably a topic for another video. Now there is a mini telemetry screen here where you can see some major events that have happened. It should not be confused with the actual application insights, where it can get at a much more granular level what has been going on with the database and what possible errors or at least actions were taken. So this is intended to just give you some major actions on the database, and sometimes you can capture here some big errors, because you will get eventually a failure message if there is such. But this cannot and should not be a replacement for the application insights. It's just let's say first base layer of information. The reported outages, I honestly have not had a reason to have any registers here. So this is supposed to be if you report or if let's say something happens crucially on the environment level. So again, I've never had this happen to me, so hopefully never does. But this is where you can see a history of how often has your database fatally crashed, essentially. Then under the operations, it's a good way to understand what has happened with your environment. So you can see when a certain environment was created, if something was modified on the settings. You don't get a lot of details, to be honest, but you can see at least which user initiated it and when something happened. So for example, you can see that there were some applications which were installed, we don't know who did it. And in this case, it's because Microsoft did it automatically as part of an upgrade. So some interesting basic data. And the last one is I kind of briefly showed the capacity screen. This is where you can and should monitor your total space that you're using with all of your environments. And you can see the total available capacity, where it comes from. You can buy additional capacity if you need to, It is quite expensive, so a general best practice is only store data in the database itself when it's really necessary. And the best practice is try to store data outside, and I can use a data lake or somewhere in a custom Dataverse stored tables. And then you can use the Power Platform to access this data and actually visualize it to the users in Business Central, whether it's Power BI, some Power Up, or Power Pages, whatever the case. So there's plenty of ways to store data and make it available to the users in Business Central without actually putting it in Business Central. And I have to be honest, if I had to explain the same topic a week ago, I would have not necessarily given you exactly this answer. So I was kind of a Power Platform, should we say, I wasn't a big fan of it. I love it as a concept, but for Business Central, it was just way too much extra coding. But I have to say I'm quite impressed by what Microsoft has been doing in the last months and years. So yeah, there'll be some more interesting videos on how Power Platform can be extremely helpful with Business Central now. So yeah, that was a little bit of a off branch. And then of course you have how many environments you have of each type, and then you have a breakdown of your capacity by database. If you need to, you can see the breakdown by table, which will actually open the environment with a page that is available from within the client of Business Central, and you can see table by table the number of records, how much size, and so on. So there'll be a whole separate, it will take a while to load. There'll be a whole separate video on explaining on some best practices on how to make sure you purge and you remove unnecessary transactions like changelog entries and stuff like that. But that's pretty much managing environments and creating environments in Business Central in the cloud. And it's quite easy and user-friendly, I have to say. There are, of course, additional topics related to how to manage user permissions, how to link the users that we created in the tenant, and how they're actually transferred to Business Central, and so on and so forth. But this video is already quite long, so I'll cut it short here. So I hope you like this content. I hope you enjoyed what I'm doing here. If you have any comments, questions, or recommendations, or if you think I got something wrong, I'm always open to having made a mistake, although I try to prepare as much as possible. Please feel free to drop a comment. And also, if you liked it, please hit the subscribe and notify to get notified for the next videos. And catch you in the next one.